I'm Agnieszka Niemark, and this is the Boyce Thompson Institute Centennial Oral History Project. My interviewee today is Ben Williams. Ben was the first BTI Director of Public Affairs and worked at BTI between 1984 and 1994. We are at Ben's home in Ithaca, upstate New York. Today is March 10, 2023. Ben, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to take part in this project.
My pleasure.
Before I talk about your work at BTI, I would like to just mention that in 1978, the Boyce Thompson Institute moved to Ithaca, upstate New York, and started to be based on the campus of Cornell University. It was a challenging time and a big change for BTI after being based for more than 50 years in Yonkers, New York. And in these years, between 1980 and 86, Dr. Roy Young was leading the institute as the managing director. And he started to deal with this new situation to improve the finances of the institute and also its image as an independent institute, but based on Cornell campus. So at that time, he proposed to you to take the position of the Director of the Public Affairs in 1984. Why do you think Roy Young believed that you are the right person for this job?
I would say that there are probably three things that might have been influential, or at least on my side. One is that I am a Cornellian by degree. I had worked at the university for a number of years and was familiar with the operation. Part of my work was in fundraising, which was important, in fact, perhaps critical to Boyce Thompson at that time, and maybe I could be helpful in that area. And thirdly, I had been a part of the community for a good many years and was familiar with the town, the Cornell community, and I thought maybe I could, or maybe he thought I could be more of an advisor, a guide, helping to bridge the gap and bring Boyce Thompson more prominently into life in the community.
Okay. So let's talk a bit more in details about your connections to Cornell and to Ithaca community. Could you tell us, Ben, where are you coming from, and also what kind of education or work connections you had with Cornell?
Yes, I can. I am not a native Ithacan, but I'm a semi-native, I would call it, because I grew up on a small dairy farm about 10 miles from Ithaca, on the road to Dryden, Route 13. I'm a product of the Dryden school system, a small central school. I graduated in 1946 from Dryden School. There were 26 in my graduating class, and graduated in June of 1946, and in September I entered Cornell University as a freshman in the College of Agriculture. And I would mention that I started there at age 16. And I mention age because, as is obvious, it was immediately after the end of World War II, which came to its conclusion in 1945. So this opened up the GI Bill for many of the veterans coming back from the war. And so I had a number of my classmates who were 4, 5, 6 years older than I, very serious about coming back and learning. And it just made a different dimension to what you might consider a student body to be. This was an older element of it. So I spent my 4 years at Cornell, the College of Agriculture. Was far from a student, but I survived, and graduated in June of 1950 with a Bachelor of Science degree from Cornell University, which was important to me. A few months later, I received my draft notice, and then in December of 1950, I became a private in the United States Army, went off to Fort Dix to do my basic training, finished that, and then branched into a course that was called Machine Accounting, and it was 6 IBM machines, which probably were the forerunner to today's computer. But I went to school for 8 weeks to learn how to run those machines, and finished that in the spring of 51. And I would say that there are probably 30 in the class, but only 4 of us were there who were unassigned, which means that we didn't have an outfit to go back to. The other 26, or whatever the number was, would go back to their initial outfit and apply what they'd learned in this school. So that meant that the 4 of us who were unassigned were up for grabs as to where we might go. And it turns out that the U.S. Army, in its infinite wisdom, did it alphabetically, so that the 2 in the front part of the alphabet, and I remember the name, Crows and Jones, went to the Far East, and Williams and Wilson went to Europe. And so from that school, I embarked over to Germany, was stationed in Frankfurt, Germany with the Army Security Agency, had the good fortune to work in an office each day and sleep in a bed each night. And I spent 18 months there, did a lot of traveling, as you could do back in the early 50s, by train around Europe, and was discharged in December of 1952. When I got home, I rekindled an acquaintance that I had at a bank that I had had conversations with prior to my going in the Army, and ended up taking a job with the Marine Midland Trust Company in Syracuse, and was in a training program for a period of time. And the next step was to become an assistant branch manager in one of their nearby branches. And I remained there for, 2 or 3 years, but got restless and was married at that time and was about to have our first youngster, and thought I needed a little bit more to my life. So began to look around and discovered that there was a position at Cornell University, my beloved alma mater, advertising for an assistant to the president. And so I applied for that job, survived the interview with the personnel director, and who set me up later with an interview with President Dean W. Malott. And had the time with President Malott. There were 3 of us, I was told. There were 2 others besides myself who had applied for the job. And had my interview, went back to Syracuse, and bit my fingernails for a while, waiting for some kind of word. And fortunately for me, I was selected to be Mr. Malott's assistant. So on the day after Labor Day in September 1958, I became the assistant to the president of Cornell University. And it turned out to be an extremely satisfying, rewarding, happy experience for me. I spent 5 highly enjoyable years with President Malott. He retired in 1963. He was just a superb mentor and a dear, dear friend. And that friendship continued on until he passed away. But I remained in frequent contact with him. But his successor was a man who came from the Carnegie Foundation in New York, Dr. James Perkins, a very scholarly person, which was somewhat different than my cut in life. I was never an academician. And it developed that we just did not have the same chemistry that I had with President Malott. And so I made the decision to look elsewhere.
I just wanted to go back for a moment to your work with Mr. Malott, since you enjoyed that position so much. It is quite impressive, Ben, that just 8 years after your graduation from Cornell, you got this position of the assistant to the president, a very complex position and challenging. Could you tell us a bit more what you enjoy the most working with Mr. Malott? Describe a little bit Cornell at the time.
Yes, the variety, for one thing. Being in the head office on a university campus is not a bad situation to be in. Lots of things going on. The people that I met, not only my associates in a day hall or around the campus, but I was also involved in the trustee meetings so that I became personally acquainted with the trustees. I can mention a few names if that would be of any interest, but Judge Mary Donlan from the U.S. Customs Court, Arthur Dean, senior partner in the Office of Sullivan and Cromwell. Arthur Dean was the chief negotiator at Panmunjom at the end of the Korean War. John and Spencer Olin of the Olin Matheson Chemical Company. Austin Kiplinger of the Kiplinger newsletter out of Washington. These were people who I became acquainted with and attended the board meetings and listened to their deliberations and discussions and decisions. So, and I happen to like sports, and so of course there's always sports going on a university campus. So there was just so much variety to what my duties were.
So this work gave you a quite good insight in general into Cornell.
Absolutely, yes. You had to have contacts all over the campus to get the job done as to what needed to be done for the president. And I remember particularly, I used to draft correspondence for Mr. Malott in answer to correspondence he had received. And one day he burst into my office, "Ha, ha, ha, Ben, did I write this or did you?" He said, and he held out a letter that I had drafted for him, but he thought it was so typical of his manner and style, which was terribly flattering, of course. And then another thing he told me along the way was that after I'd been there a couple of years, he said, "I want you to feel free to take whatever you feel you can handle so that I don't have a lot of stuff on my desk and I can concentrate on the really critical things that need to be handled by the president." So he gave me free rein to assume responsibility. He told me that if I made a mistake, he would let me know, but just don't do it again. And so we had that kind of a relationship, and it was just almost a joy to work. You could be happy about going to work in the morning.
Yeah, that says a lot about the trust he had in you and your work, and about your relation with him. So Ben, so you spent in the president office 5 years, about 5 years with Mr. Malott, and then a few years with the next president, Mr. Perkins. What happened after this experience?
Well, as I mentioned, I made the decision that I needed to make a change. Dr. Perkins was not going to make a change. So I discovered that there was a contract that Cornell had with the United States Agency for International Development. And this contract was located in Liberia in West Africa. And a friend of mine who had previously worked in the treasurer's office at Cornell had served as administrative officer there for 2 years, and his tour of duty had come to a close, and so they were in need of an administrative officer for that contract. So I applied and was selected to be the administrative officer. So in May of 1965, I, my wife, and my 3 small children, the youngest of whom was not yet 3, the oldest was 6, headed for Monrovia, Liberia. And I took up my duties as administrative officer there. Again, a very broadening experience. Liberia is in West Africa, located 3 degrees off the equator, very close to the ocean. So one of our main forms of recreation was to visit the beach and the ocean. And we also had the opportunity to travel. Under the U.S. government regulations, Liberia was considered a hardship post, so that government employees who worked there, which happened to be the AID employees and those under contract with AID, were entitled to a rest and recuperation period once each year. And so we traveled to Europe all 3 years that we were there.
So it was a quite adventurous position. Could you tell us a bit more what was the project about? What Cornell was doing there?
Cornell's assignment with this contract was to assist the University of Liberia in a general upgrading of their overall operation. It was actually, in our terms, in American terms, it was nothing more than a glorified high school. It had about 500 students there, and it was our job, the Cornell job, to try and bring it more up to a university level of instruction and operation. So we had a team of technicians, up to 12 at any one time, but technicians who were assigned to the Dean of Students office, the library, the finance office. We had a couple of teachers that actually worked in the classroom. And of course, the chief of party for our contract worked directly with the president of the university. And that contract, I went initially for 2 years, and then it turned out that the contract was going to terminate in another year after that. So I was asked to stay on for a 3rd year, which we did. And then the contract was over. And hopefully some of what we accomplished there remained, but we don't know for sure.
Did you continue with Cornell after your return from Liberia?
When I accepted the job to go to Liberia, I was given the assurance, not guaranteed, but given the assurance that every opportunity would be made to find something for me suitable at Cornell when my time was up. So fortunately, I had a choice of 3 positions back at Cornell when I was offered 3 positions when my time was up. And I chose to be the director of regional offices at Cornell when I returned in the summer of '68, June or July. And the regional offices were an arrangement that had been set up during Cornell's centennial year, a major fundraising effort, and in order to stimulate alumni activity and interest and affection for their university, regional offices were set up in major cities such as New York, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Chicago, out on the West Coast, Texas, and in Florida. And so it was determined that that had been a successful venture, and it was propitious to continue those offices. And so I then took on the responsibility or assignment of being the on-campus coordinator of those offices. It was kind of a login point. If they had questions or interests or needed whatever, I was the contact point for that. So that's what I did with Cornell. Worked quite actively in alumni circles and in the fundraising end of it. And
so you gain a quite broad experience
indeed.
In different fields regarding the campus, international programs, and also regional offices.
And you get to know your alumni and what their capabilities are and potential is, which is always helpful. But there came time for a change, and one day I received a phone message, and it said, "This is Mr. Roy Park. Would you please call me?" And I knew Roy Park as being a prominent citizen in the Ithaca area and a very successful businessman, but I couldn't imagine why he was calling me. Well, to abbreviate the story a little bit, my dear friend, President Malott, who I continue to have frequent and regular contact with, had suggested my name to Mr. Park because Mr. Park needed some administrative assistance similar to what I had done with President Malott. And so Mr. Malott recommended me to him. So I had my interview with Mr. Park, and he offered me the job, and I decided that I would take it. It was time to leave the not-for-profit spectrum and go to the for-profit and see how that worked for a while. So I joined the Park organization, which at that time was known as Park Broadcasting, because he owned the maximum number of broadcasting properties that were permitted by the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, which I think was 8 AM stations, 8 FM stations, and 8 television stations. And these were scattered across the country. We even had an Park had an FM station in Seattle, Washington. But at that time, when I joined him in '75, he was looking to expand into the print business. He already owned 3 newspapers at that time, one in Warner Robins, Georgia, one in Brookville, Florida, and one in Manassas, Virginia. And he wanted to expand that business. And so he was looking to buy individual newspapers in small cities. So it was a very exciting time to be a part of that organization and see the business grow. At that time, Mr. Park was chairman of the board of Ithaca College, chairman of the board of trustees at Ithaca College. And so because of my close association with Mr. Park and the business, I also got connected with Ithaca College and became acquainted with a number of people up there and their programs, schools. And
so just for the record, I wanted to mention here, Ben, that Mr. Roy Park was a very successful entrepreneur at the time that you joined his corporation, and soon he will also become a board member of the Boyce Thompson Institute around 1984 when you will move to BTI. And also one of the significant donors, Park Foundation became a donor for BTI. Could you tell us how your relation with Mr. Park affected the decision of Roy Young when it comes to your employment? Because you mentioned to me that the two men knew each other, and that was a bit delicate situation. Can you explain this transfer between Roy Park work and BTI?
Let me just also add a couple of other footnotes to that Mr. Park was a very successful and shrewd businessman, and he'd work 24 hours a day if he could stand it. And that grows a little weird after a while. And so I decided that after 10 years, maybe I should try something else. So I contacted one of my friends back on the Cornell campus and said, I'd like to come back to Cornell if there's something there for me. And so subsequently, it became known that there was this position at Boyce Thompson Institute. And I had my interview with Dr. Roy Young, who was then the managing director, and he told me at that time that this was a very delicate situation for him because Roy Park was a personal friend and that they were Rotarians together and that they'd met socially on various occasions. And so he didn't want Mr. Park to think that he, Roy Young, was stealing one of Mr. Park's employees. And I told him that no, that would not be a problem because I had completed my tour of duty at the Park organization, and I was looking for other challenges, another chapter in my working career.
Could you explain also, Ben, this arrangement that was made between Cornell and BTI? Because as we mentioned at the beginning, BTI was an independent, financially it was an independent organization, and you were looking for your work through Cornell placements. Can you explain how this was arranged?
Yes, to my benefit, Cornell was willing to work out an arrangement with Boyce Thompson so that I would continue as an employee of Cornell, and Cornell would then bill Boyce Thompson for whatever costs were involved in my salary and benefits and that sort of any other ancillary costs that there were. I had completed 17 years at Cornell prior to going to working for Mr. Park, and I would like to build that up to the 25-year level, which also carries with it certain perks and benefits and into retirement. So this was an arrangement that was worked out for me. Maybe it was done with others. I suspect it probably was, but it was my good fortune to benefit from it.
And what do you think when at the time, was BTI considered as a part of Cornell, or people were aware that this is an independent institution just based on the campus? What was your feeling about BTI at the moment when you were getting the job?
I guess I would say I was almost totally unfamiliar with it. I knew that they came to the campus. I knew that there was a local committee of business people who had lobbied in Albany to make Cornell the site of the move from Yonkers when Boyce Thompson decided that they needed to relocate. I think that Syracuse University was also under consideration as a location. I'm not positive about that. My memory is not that strong, but I think Syracuse was the other institution. And the business people, the community people in Ithaca wanted to be sure that the decision was made to bring it to Cornell.
So Ben, could you talk about what kind of tasks Dr. Young wanted you to fulfill? What your position involved?
Yes, the Director of Public Affairs is kind of a large umbrella. My principal duty, I guess I would say principal, was to help with the fundraising. The Institute needed additional funding, and that was part of my role. It was also to help build the reputation of the Institute. It carried on some very sophisticated plant research, but it was not well known. It wasn't widely advertised. And so my job also was to help it become more recognized and accepted. And we did that through working with the Cornell News Bureau, where we would have press releases about major scientific developments that took place at Boyce Thompson. And the other part of it was bringing Boyce Thompson into not only the Cornell community, but also the Ithaca community, and making it a vital part of the overall community picture. So those were kind of my general guidelines for the job.
Did Dr. Young help you to build certain strategies, or he gave you quite a lot of independence in the way how you advertise the work of the Institute?
Dr. Young had a laissez-faire type of management style, and so he was available, of course, for consultation at any time, but I was pretty much on my own to develop whatever I could muster in the way of fundraising. I had to be alert to others in the Institute to tell me about scientific developments. I would not know who had success in what area, in what laboratory. But then I could carry the ball and take it to the Cornell News Bureau. Generally, one of the representatives from the News Bureau would come to the Institute and actually spend time with the scientist and in his laboratory if there was a news story to report.
So I could see, for example, in the Cornell Chronicle that there was a regular coverage of the events related to BTI or discoveries and research programs. Can you talk about that work? You said there was a science writer or journalist who was covering on regular basis everything that was happening.
Well, there was an individual, an employee in the News Bureau that was considered the science writer, and he would be the one that would come and spend time with the scientists at BTI when there was noteworthy things to report, not only to the trade journals, but also to the local community, or not necessarily local, but to the local press. So.
And could you also talk, Ben, about a bit more about the relations with the community? You mentioned to me that Rotary Club was one of the places when you could make some contacts with local businessmen and people from the community. And you also mentioned organizing an annual event for some people who were...
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, there was a committee, and I'm not sure the derivation of it, how it came about, but before Boyce Thompson was selected to come to Cornell, there was a committee appointed to work with Albany and actually promote bringing the Institute to the Cornell campus. And so that nucleus of business people were prominent leaders in the Ithaca community. And I kind of acquired that group as part of the Boyce Thompson group of interest or supporters. And so shortly after I was there, and I can't tell you exactly when, but soon after I was there, we made the decision to have this group of business people, some business, some just local citizens, come to Boyce Thompson and spend 3 or 4 hours, serve them lunch, tell them about things that are going on at the Institute, and have one of the scientists make a presentation in as layman terms as is possible so that they could all understand the kind of technical work that was going on at the Institute. And so that became an annual event, and I think and hope was looked forward to by the local people. I think they valued their relationship with BTI and the work that was being undertaken there.
Ben, so you worked for a couple of years with Mr. Young, but in 1986, he was replaced by a new president, Mr. Ralph Hardy, and you also worked for a couple of years with him. Mr. Hardy is credited in general for improving the financial situation of the Institute. So the Institute for several years in the early 1980s was not running on a balanced budget and needed more funding. And I think Mr. Hardy helped with this situation. Could you talk a little bit about differences between management style of Mr. Young and Mr. Hardy and how your cooperation with the new president looked like?
Yes, management style was entirely different between the two men. Both highly professional, of course, both scientists, but their style was significantly different. Dr. Young was a very quiet, soft-spoken, easygoing, laid-back administrator, chief officer, and I can't really give you an opinion as to how that worked with the scientists and what direction he gave them for their work. But with me, he was always available. I never had a problem that I couldn't see him or consult with him, advise him about certain matters. Whereas in contrast, Dr. Hardy was a much more active, vigorous, get things done kind of a individual. And that was his management style, and obviously he was successful at that. I found him equally as cooperative to work with. I had no issues with working with either one of them, but it took some adjustment, of course, to adjust to Dr. Hardy's style.
And you describe your position at BTI as a one-person job. What you meant by that? And there was no office of sort of, public relations. It was mostly you dealing with advertisement.
When I went to BTI in 1984, it was strictly a one-person operation. I had an office, and whatever administrative help that I might need, I had access to Dr. Young's secretary at the time, and that was prior to Greta Calavito. But when Greta was there in Dr. Hardy's time, she was the one that I would turn to help with typing letters or typing reports or whatever administrative help I might need. But I had no one to turn to for professional assistance.
Maybe we could mention here that one of the events, annual events that you organized together with Greta Calavito was the quarter-century club or dinners, as it was called. And it was an event which started in 1991, and it was a dinner organized annually for the employees of BTI who worked for the Institute for 25 years or more. This is here the name, hence the name Quarter Century Club. Could you talk a little bit about this event and why it was important for BTI to do that?
Yes, I was not strictly involved with certainly not involved in the originating of it. I suspect that came from a number of the employees who had actually completed a good long time, devoted a major portion of their lives to scientific research at Boyce Thompson. But as it came into being, I was involved in much of the logistics that go into having a dinner, where it's located, what the menu is, what the date is, are there to be favors, is there a speaker, that sort of thing. And I was fortunate enough to attend one or two of them, although I didn't qualify on length of service criteria. But it was important, I think, for the employees of BTI to be recognized in this fashion. Cornell has a 25-year group, I know, which I did eventually qualify for. And it's a very effective employee benefit.
So Ben, basically you spent the last 10 years of your career at BTI and still on Cornell campus. How do you remember these years in general? What kind of experience it was?
I remember my time at BTI very fondly. I liked the work that I was doing. I liked the people that I was working with. I liked the two senior officers, Dr. Young and Dr. Hardy, that I worked with and for. I developed many friendships there. I consider all of the people that worked there when I was there to be my friends. Some were closer friends than others. I guess if I had to select one or two or three names that I would consider my closest, I'd list John Dentes, the financial officer who happens to be another Cornellian, and John and I had some things in common. Bob Granatus, who was head of one of the scientific programs, and his office was next to mine, and we both loved sports, and so we had a lot in common. And then there is a man who maybe is retired now just recently by the name of Don Slocum, who was a maintenance person there, worked in the greenhouses. And I still see Don to this day. He and his wife are personal friends of mine, and our paths do cross from time to time. But I still get invited to certain social events that are held or sponsored by Boyce Thompson. They have traditionally had a summer picnic, and I make an effort to attend those. I don't know very many of the people, hardly any, as a matter of fact, of those who turn, but Don Slocum will show up, so I do have somebody, possibly John Dentes. So, but I have very fond memories of my time and being on the Cornell campus was an added bonus for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben, for today. I hope the centennial celebration will be another occasion to meet people that you work with some time ago. And thank you so much for today.
Thank you for having me a part of this exercise. It's been fun.
Thank you, Ben.